April 17, 1943, 27,000 feet above the French countryside, 11:43 a.m. The morning sun cast long shadows across the English Channel as Lieutenant Robert Johnson pressed his oxygen mask tighter against his face. The cockpit of his Republic P-47 Thunderbolt trembled with the deep, resonant thunder of the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, 2,000 horsepower of American industrial might, wrapped in 7 tons of steel and aluminum. Below him, the patchwork fields of occupied France stretched endlessly, while ahead, somewhere in that crystalline blue sky, German fighters waited. Johnson's hands gripped the control stick, feeling the weight of his machine, a flying fortress that dwarfed every other single-engine fighter ever built. 8 Browning 50 caliber machine guns nestled in his wings, each loaded with 425 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition. In total, 3,400 rounds waited for his command, enough firepower to deliver 13 pounds of lead per second when all guns fired together. But on this morning, as he led the 61st Fighter Squadron deeper into enemy territory, Johnson could not have imagined that he was piloting what would become the Luftwaffe's most feared nightmare. The radio crackled with German voices, intercepted transmissions filled with laughter and casual dismissal. Die fliegende Milchflasche, they called it, the flying milk bottle. To veteran Luftwaffe pilots who had carved their reputations from the skies above Poland, France, and Britain, this lumbering American giant looked like nothing more than an oversized target, too heavy to turn, too slow to climb, too clumsy to fight. They had faced Spitfires and Hurricanes, nimble dancers that could twist and spiral in aerial ballet. This American brute seemed to lumber through the sky like a flying barn door. But those German pilots, flying their sleek Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, could not yet comprehend what American industrial philosophy had wrought. They saw bulk where they should have seen armor. They perceived sluggishness where they should have recognized overwhelming power. They laughed at what they considered American engineering naivety, not understanding that this machine represented a fundamental shift in aerial warfare, from graceful dogfighting to brutal, decisive firepower. The P-47 Thunderbolt emerged from a crucible of American ambition and European necessity. In 1940, as the Battle of Britain raged across English skies, the United States Army Air Corps witnessed the limitations of their existing fighter philosophy. Early American fighters prioritized speed and maneuverability, but lacked the firepower and protection necessary for the industrial-scale warfare consuming Europe. The Army Air Corps issued new requirements that seemed almost impossible. A fighter capable of 400 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, armed with 8 50 caliber machine guns, and protected by substantial armor plating. Republic Aviation, led by Alexander Kartveli, accepted this challenge with characteristic American audacity. Rather than compromise between competing demands, they decided to excel at everything simultaneously. The result was a machine that redefined what a single-engine fighter could be. Where European designers pursued elegant efficiency, Kartveli embraced brute force engineering. The P-47's fuselage was built around the massive R2800 engine, creating a fighter that weighed nearly twice as much as contemporary German aircraft. This philosophical difference reflected deeper cultural distinctions between American and European approaches to warfare. European air forces, constrained by limited industrial capacity and fuel shortages, had developed fighters that maximized performance per pound of material. American industry, blessed with vast resources and protected by 2 oceans, could afford to build fighters that maximized absolute performance regardless of weight or complexity. The P-47 embodied American abundance, excessive, overwhelming, and ultimately irresistible. By spring 1943, as Johnson's squadron crossed into French airspace, the Thunderbolt represented more than just another fighter aircraft. It symbolized American industrial might entering the European conflict, carrying not just bombs and bullets, but the productive capacity of an entire continent. Each P-47 contained 15,000 individual parts, manufactured across dozens of American factories, assembled by workers who had never experienced bombing raids or rationed food. This was warfare by abundance, a concept that German pilots, fighting with increasingly scarce resources, found difficult to comprehend. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber of Jagdgeschwader 26 first encountered P-47s over Saint-Omer on March 28, 1943. Weber, a veteran of the Eastern Front with 14 confirmed kills, expected easy prey. "When I first saw these American machines," he later wrote in his combat report, "I thought they were twin-engine bombers that had lost their formation. They appeared impossibly large for single-seat fighters, and they flew in such rigid formations that I assumed their pilots must be poorly trained." Weber's initial attack seemed to confirm his assumptions. His Focke-Wulf 190 climbed effortlessly above the American formation, positioned perfectly for a diving attack. The P-47s appeared sluggish in their response, unable to match his climb rate or turning radius. Weber selected his target, a P-47 trailing slightly behind the formation, and dove with the confidence of a veteran predator. But confidence shattered against reality in the span of seconds. As Weber approached firing range, the P-47's rear gunner, for Weber still believed he was attacking a two-seat aircraft, suddenly erupted in defensive fire. 8 streams of tracer rounds filled the air, creating a wall of lead that Weber had never encountered from a single aircraft. His Focke-Wulf shuddered under the impact of multiple 150 caliber hits, cannon shells tearing through his wing root and engine cowling. Weber's combat report, filed later that evening, revealed his shock. "The firepower was unlike anything I have experienced. These are not the light machine guns we faced from British fighters. Each round felt like cannon fire. My aircraft sustained damage that should have come from an entire flight of Spitfires, but this was from a single American machine." This encounter, repeated dozens of times during the spring of 1943, revealed the first flaw in German assumptions. Luftwaffe pilots had trained to exploit the relatively light armament of British fighters, typically 4 or 6 rifle-caliber machine guns. Against such opposition, German fighters could absorb considerable damage while closing to lethal range. But the P-47's 8 50 caliber guns delivered more striking power than anything European designers had imagined practical for a single-seat fighter. Lieutenant Colonel Hub Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group, observed this transformation in German tactics firsthand. "After our first few encounters, we noticed German pilots becoming much more cautious. They would no longer press attacks that previously seemed routine. The psychological impact of our firepower became as important as its physical effects." The 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns that armed every P-47 represented another manifestation of American abundance. While European air forces rationed ammunition and carefully selected targets, American pilots carried enough rounds to sustain prolonged engagements. Each gun fired at 800 rounds per minute, and with 3,400 rounds total, a P-47 pilot could maintain maximum firepower for nearly 3 minutes of continuous combat. An eternity in aerial warfare. But German pilots soon discovered that the P-47's advantages extended far beyond firepower. The same philosophy that produced overwhelming armament also created unprecedented survivability. Major Gerhard Vogt of Jagdgeschwader II learned this lesson during a combat over Abbeville on May 12, 1943. Vogt had successfully positioned his Messerschmitt Bf 109 behind a lone P-47, apparently separated from its formation during the chaos of combat. From 200 meters range, Vogt fired a perfect burst, watching his 20mm cannon shells and machine gun rounds strike the American fighter along its fuselage and wing roots. The P-47 shuddered under the impacts, trailing smoke and losing altitude. Fought closed for the killing shot, certain of his victory. But the P-47 refused to die. Despite absorbing what should have been fatal damage, the American fighter continued flying, its pilot maintaining control and even attempting evasive maneuvers. Vogt fired again, emptying his remaining ammunition into the damaged aircraft. Still, the P-47 flew on, leaving Vogt with empty guns and a profound sense of disbelief. "I hit that American machine with enough firepower to destroy 2 Spitfires," Vogt reported. "I watched my shells explode against its fuselage and wings. By all logic, it should have been destroyed, yet it continued flying as if nothing had happened." This was my first indication that we faced something entirely different from previous Allied fighters. The P-47 that absorbed Vogt's attack was piloted by Second Lieutenant Robert Johnson, the same pilot who had crossed into French airspace on April 17th. Johnson's aircraft sustained 21 cannon shell hits and over 200 machine gun strikes during that engagement, yet he successfully returned to base and landed safely. When ground crews examined his aircraft, they found damage that should have been impossibly survivable. Severed control cables, punctured fuel tanks, destroyed hydraulic lines, and shredded aluminum skin throughout the airframe. Johnson's survival illustrated the P-47's most revolutionary characteristic, its ability to absorb punishment that would destroy any other single-engine fighter. This survivability stemmed from the same American design philosophy that produced overwhelming firepower. If weight was not a constraint, engineers could build redundancy into every critical system. The P-47 featured dual hydraulic systems, armored fuel tanks, protected control cables, and most importantly, an air-cooled radial engine that could continue operating despite severe battle damage. German pilots, accustomed to the vulnerability of liquid-cooled engines, found this incomprehensible. A single rifle-caliber bullet through a coolant line could disable a Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf, forcing its pilot to attempt emergency landing behind enemy lines. But the P-47's radial engine, with its independently cooled cylinders, could lose multiple cylinders and continue running. Major Heinz Baer of Jagdgeschwader 1 documented this phenomenon in his personal diary. "We have learned to aim for the engine when attacking Allied fighters, as this typically ensures immediate destruction. But these American radial engines seem immune to our tactics. I have observed P-47s with clearly damaged engines continuing to fight effectively." The transformation of German perceptions accelerated throughout the summer of 1943, as P-47 squadrons gained combat experience and refined their tactics. What had initially appeared to be sluggish, easy targets revealed themselves as formidable, adversaries that could dictate the terms of engagement, through superior high-altitude performance and devastating diving. Attacks. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski of the 56th Fighter Group embodied this tactical evolution. Initially frustrated by the P-47's poor climbing ability and sluggish turning performance, Gabreski learned to exploit the aircraft's strengths while avoiding situations that exposed its weaknesses. "We couldn't turn with the Germans," Gabreski later explained, "but we didn't need to. We could dive faster than anything they had. We could survive damage that would destroy their aircraft, and when we got within range, we could deliver more firepower than an entire squadron of their fighters." Gabreski's tactics became the standard for P-47 operations. Maintain altitude advantage. Attack from above in high-speed dives. Deliver devastating firepower in a single pass. Then extend away from the combat zone using superior diving speed. If German fighters attempted pursuit, the P-47 could either outrun them in a shallow dive or turn to face them with overwhelming firepower. This tactical approach proved devastatingly effective against German formation attacks. Luftwaffe fighters relied on coordinated maneuvers and mutual support to overcome numerically superior Allied forces. But the P-47's firepower made close formation flying suicidal. A single American fighter could damage multiple German aircraft in a single firing pass. German formations were forced to disperse, losing their tactical coherence and becoming vulnerable to individual American attacks. Oberst Adolf Galland, general of the Luftwaffe fighter force, recognized this shift in his post-war memoir. The appearance of the P-47 marked the beginning of our tactical disadvantage in Western Europe. Previous Allied fighters could be engaged on relatively equal terms if our pilots maintained proper formation discipline and exploited their superior maneuverability. But the P-47 forced us to abandon the close formation tactics that had served us well since the beginning of the war. The two 850 caliber machine guns that armed every P-47 became the defining symbol of American aerial supremacy. Unlike the mixed armament of German fighters, typically combining rifle-caliber machine guns with a few slow-firing cannons, the P-47's uniform battery delivered consistent, overwhelming firepower. Each 50-caliber round possessed nearly twice the kinetic energy of German rifle-caliber bullets, while the high rate of fire ensured multiple hits during the brief moments when targets appeared in the gun sight. Master Sergeant Anthony Tex Romano, an armorer with the 56th Fighter Group, described the psychological impact of the P-47's armament on both sides. When our boys opened up with all 8 guns, you could see the effect on German pilots immediately. They weren't used to that volume of fire from a single aircraft. Some would break off attacks the moment they saw our tracers, even if they had tactical advantage. On our side, pilots gained tremendous confidence knowing they could outgun anything the Germans had. The 50 caliber rounds also proved more effective against German armor protection than previously anticipated. While German fighters featured heavy armor plating around the cockpit and engine, this protection had been designed to defeat British rifle-caliber bullets. The heavier American rounds could penetrate armor that stopped lighter projectiles, making even head-on attacks viable for experienced P-47 pilots. By autumn 1943, German combat reports revealed growing respect and concern regarding P-47 capabilities. Major Egon Mayer of Jagdgeschwader II, one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced bomber destroyers, noted the changing dynamic in his operational reports. American fighter escort has become significantly more effective since the introduction of the P-47. These aircraft possess sufficient performance to escort bombers throughout their mission profiles while maintaining enough firepower to engage our interceptors on favorable terms. We can no longer assume tactical superiority when attacking American formations. The P-47's operational success extended beyond individual combat encounters. Its exceptional range, over 1,000 miles with external fuel tanks, allowed American bomber formations to maintain fighter escort deep into German territory. This capability, combined with the aircraft's survivability and firepower, forced the Luftwaffe to commit increasing numbers of fighters to defend against American daylight raids, weakening other fronts and accelerating the depletion of experienced German pilots. General Adolf Galland summarized the strategic impact in his post-war writings. The P-47 represented more than just another fighter aircraft. It embodied American industrial capacity entering the European conflict. Each aircraft carried not only overwhelming firepower, but also the productive power of American factories. We could destroy individual P-47s, but we could not match the rate at which American industry replaced them. The winter of 1943-44 marked the full maturation of P-47 operations in the European theater of operations. By this period, German pilots had completely abandoned their initial contempt for the flying milk bottle, recognizing it as perhaps the most dangerous opponent they faced. Combat reports from this period reveal systematic German tactical adaptations designed specifically to counter P-47 advantages. Hauptmann Kurt Bühligen of Jagdgeschwader II developed what became known as the Thunderbolt defense, a series of tactical maneuvers designed to exploit the P-47's remaining weaknesses, while avoiding direct confrontation with its strengths. We learned that the American machine could not turn with our fighters below 20,000 feet, Hooligan explained in his combat memoir. But we also learned that we could not survive prolonged engagement with their firepower. Our tactics became focused on brief, high-speed attacks, followed by immediate disengagement. These new German tactics acknowledged the P-47's fundamental transformation of aerial combat. Traditional dogfighting, the graceful turning battles that had characterized air warfare since World War I, became suicidal against American firepower. German pilots were forced to adopt hit-and-run tactics more appropriate for attacking bombers than fighting other fighters. The symbolic importance of the .50 caliber machine gun reached its apotheosis during this period. American pilots began referring to their guns as Madus, a term of endearment that reflected both familiarity and respect for their weapons' capabilities. The sound of 8 .50 caliber guns firing simultaneously became the signature of American air power, instantly recognizable to both friend and foe. Technical Sergeant Michael O'Brien, who maintained the guns for the 78th Fighter Group, observed the psychological effect of this firepower. German pilots would sometimes break off attacks the moment they heard our guns firing, even if they weren't being targeted. That sound, 8 .50s at full rate, became associated with American aerial supremacy. Our pilots knew that no German fighter could match that volume of fire, and apparently the Germans knew it too. The industrial symbolism of the P-47 became increasingly apparent as production numbers soared throughout 1944. Republic Aviation, supported by American industrial capacity operating beyond the reach of German bombers, produced P-47s at rates that German industry could not match despite mobilizing their entire economy for total war. In 1944 alone, American factories delivered over 8,000 P-47s, more than the entire German fighter production for that year. Each P-47 represented approximately 15,000 man-hours of American labor, performed by workers earning regular wages in factories operating 3 shifts per day. German aircraft production, by contrast, increasingly relied on slave labor operating under constant threat of Allied bombing raids. This industrial disparity meant that every P-47 shot down could be replaced quickly, while German losses became increasingly irreplaceable. Major Johann Steinhoff of Jagdgeschwader 7 recognized this strategic reality in his wartime diary. "We are not merely fighting American pilots. We are fighting American industrial capacity. Each victory we achieve is temporary, as American factories produce replacements faster than we can destroy them. Meanwhile, every German aircraft lost represents a significant reduction in our overall combat effectiveness." The P-47's 8 .50 caliber guns became the mechanical embodiment of American abundance, not merely sufficient firepower for aerial combat, but overwhelming, excessive firepower that demonstrated American capacity to exceed any reasonable requirement. While German fighters carefully rationed ammunition and selected targets based on tactical necessity, P-47 pilots could afford to engage any target with maximum firepower, confident that American factories would provide unlimited replacement ammunition. This abundance mentality extended beyond mere firepower to encompass the entire American approach to aerial warfare. P-47 squadrons operated with maintenance standards that seemed luxurious to German units struggling with spare parts shortages. American pilots flew regularly scheduled training missions to maintain proficiency, while German pilots were increasingly thrown into combat with minimal preparation. American air bases featured permanent facilities, hot meals, and regular mail service, while German airfields were frequently relocated to avoid Allied bombing campaigns. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Hub Zemke, commanding the 56th Fighter Group, articulated this contrast in his operational reports. "Our German opponents are skilled and courageous, but they operate under severe material constraints that limit their effectiveness. We possess not only superior equipment, but also the logistical support necessary to maintain peak performance indefinitely." This is not merely a contest between individual pilots. It is a competition between industrial systems. By 1945, the transformation was complete. The aircraft that German pilots had initially dismissed as a flying milk bottle had become the most feared opponent in European skies. P-47 squadrons had destroyed over 7,000 German aircraft, more than half in air-to-air combat, while achieving the lowest loss rate of any American fighter in the European theater of operations. The statistical evidence overwhelmingly documented German fears. Luftwaffe combat reports from 1945 show that German pilots avoided engagement with P-47 formations whenever possible, preferring to attack unescorted bombers or less heavily armed fighters. When forced to engage P-47s, German pilots increasingly relied on high-altitude bounce attacks, diving from superior altitude to deliver brief attacks before climbing away from American response. Oberst Gerhard Barkhorn, the Luftwaffe's second-highest scoring ace, candidly assessed the P-47's impact in his post-war interrogation. The P-47 changed everything about air combat over Western Europe. Its firepower made formation flying dangerous. Its durability made single attacks ineffective, and its numbers made sustained combat impossible. By 1945, encountering P-47s meant choosing between disengagement and almost certain destruction. The 850 caliber machine guns that had initially seemed excessive now appeared prescient. American weapons designers had correctly anticipated that aerial combat would evolve toward brief, high-speed encounters, where overwhelming firepower delivered in seconds would determine outcomes. While German fighters retained superior maneuverability in theoretical turning fights, actual combat occurred at speeds and altitudes where such advantages became irrelevant. Colonel Donald Blakesley of the 4th Fighter Group summarized this tactical evolution. German pilots still flew excellent aircraft and demonstrated superior individual skill in many encounters. But air combat had become an industrial process, not an individual art form. Success depended on firepower, durability, and numbers, areas where American engineering philosophy provided decisive advantages. 23. P-47's symbolic significance extended beyond its combat effectiveness to encompass broader themes of American industrial democracy. Unlike German aircraft production, which relied increasingly on slave labor and authoritarian direction, P-47 manufacturing involved thousands of free workers earning regular wages in democratic factories. The aircraft embodied not just American productive capacity, but American values, abundance, technological optimism, and industrial democracy competing against scarcity, technological pessimism, and totalitarian command. Technical innovations that supported P-47 operations also reflected democratic principles. American pilots received extensive training before entering combat, benefiting from educational programs that treated pilots as skilled professionals rather than expendable resources. American maintenance procedures emphasized systematic inspection and preventive replacement, ensuring peak aircraft performance through industrial standardization rather than individual craftsmanship. Major Francis Gabreski, who became the top-scoring P-47 ace in the European theater with 34.5 confirmed victories, reflected on this broader significance. Flying the P-47 meant representing more than just American air power. It meant demonstrating that democratic societies could produce superior technology through free enterprise and voluntary cooperation. Every mission proved that liberty could outproduce tyranny. The final months of the European War witnessed German pilots completely abandoning their initial contempt for American industrial philosophy. Combat reports from early 1945 show Luftwaffe units actively avoiding P-47 formations, recognizing that engagement typically resulted in German losses disproportionate to any tactical advantage gained. The 50 caliber machine gun had become the sonic signature of American aerial supremacy. German pilots could identify P-47s by the distinctive sound of their engines and guns, learning to distinguish American formations from British units equipped with different armament. This acoustic recognition often triggered immediate defensive maneuvers, as German pilots attempted to avoid the overwhelming firepower that had cost the Luftwaffe thousands of aircraft and irreplaceable experienced pilots. Hauptmann Erich Rudolfer, who survived 1,000 combat missions and achieved 222 confirmed victories, described the psychological impact of facing P-47s. By 1945, the sound of American .50 caliber guns firing had become associated with imminent danger. Pilots would involuntarily tense when hearing that distinctive hammering sound, knowing that survival depended on immediate evasive action. The P-47 had achieved something remarkable. It had made veterans, German pilots, fear a single American aircraft more than entire squadrons of other Allied fighters. The statistical evidence supported German fears. P-47 units consistently achieved kill ratios exceeding 3.1 against all German opposition, while suffering the lowest loss rates of any American fighter in the European theater. The 56th Fighter Group alone, flying P-47s throughout the war, achieved 637.5, confirmed air-to-air victories while losing only 128 aircraft to all causes. These numbers reflected more than pilot skill or aircraft performance. They demonstrated the superiority of American industrial philosophy applied to aerial warfare. Each P-47 represented the collaborative effort of thousands of American workers, from aluminum miners in Tennessee to precision instrument makers in Connecticut. The aircraft embodied democratic manufacturing principles, standardized production, quality control, continuous improvement, and abundant resources applied systematically rather than sporadically. General Karl Tui Spaatz, commanding the United States Strategic Air Forces in Europe, recognized this broader significance. The P-47 proved that American industry could produce weapons systems superior to anything achieved by authoritarian command economies. Our victory in the air war resulted not from individual heroism, though our pilots displayed exceptional courage, but from systematic application of democratic industrial principles to military requirements. The transformation of German attitudes toward the P-47 also reflected changing perceptions of American military capability. Early in the war, German propaganda had dismissed Americans as industrially capable but militarily naive. The success of P-47 operations forced German leadership to acknowledge that American weapons designers understood aerial warfare requirements better than their European counterparts. Field Marshal Erhard Milch, responsible for German aircraft production, admitted this miscalculation in his post-war testimony. "We assumed that American fighters would reflect American inexperience with modern air combat. The P-47 proved that American engineers understood the requirements of industrial warfare better than we did. They correctly anticipated that air combat would become a contest of firepower and durability rather than individual skill and maneuverability." The 850 caliber machine guns that transformed the P-47 from mockery to menace represented more than technological innovation. They symbolized American abundance applied to warfare with devastating effectiveness. Each round fired carried the productive capacity of American industry. From copper mines in Montana to brass foundries in Connecticut, from powder mills in Delaware to ammunition plants in Kansas. German pilots, fighting with increasingly scarce resources and deteriorating equipment, faced opponents equipped with seemingly unlimited ammunition manufactured in factories beyond the reach of German retaliation. The psychological impact of this disparity extended beyond individual combat encounters to encompass strategic morale. German pilots knew that every round they fired reduced their remaining combat capability, while American pilots could afford to engage any target with maximum firepower. This abundance philosophy culminated in the P-47's ground attack missions during the final months of the war. Armed with up to 3,000 pounds of bombs and rockets in addition to their machine guns, P-47s systematically destroyed German transportation networks, supply depots, and communication facilities. The same aircraft that had gained aerial supremacy became the primary instrument of American close air support, delivering devastating firepower against German ground forces. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Scott, commanding the 365th Fighter Group, observed the comprehensive nature of P-47 dominance. By early 1945, we controlled European skies so completely that our primary mission shifted from air-to-air combat to ground attack. The P-47's ability to carry heavy bomb loads while retaining full fighter capability meant that German ground units faced constant threat from aircraft they could neither intercept nor effectively counter. This represented the ultimate expression of American air power philosophy. Overwhelming capability applied systematically and persistently. The .50 caliber. Guns that had initially symbolized excessive American firepower became the foundation for multi-role operations. The German aircraft could not match, while German fighters remained specialized for either air-to-air combat or ground attack. The P-47 excelled at both missions simultaneously. This versatility reflected American industrial capacity to produce aircraft with sufficient power, payload, and protection to perform multiple roles effectively. German attempts to counter P-47 operations through technological innovation largely failed due to resource constraints and production limitations. Advanced German fighters like the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet possessed superior performance but remained too few in number to affect strategic outcomes. The Luftwaffe's final fighter designs emphasized economy of production rather than combat effectiveness, acknowledging that German industry could no longer compete with American productive capacity. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, commanding Jagdgeschwader 7 equipped with Me-262 Messerschmitts jets, recognized this fundamental limitation. Our advanced aircraft possessed theoretical advantages over American fighters, but we could not produce them in sufficient numbers to achieve meaningful results. Meanwhile, American factories continued delivering P-47s in quantities that overwhelmed our defensive capabilities regardless of individual aircraft superiority. As the European War reached its conclusion in May 1945, the transformation of the P-47 from derided flying milk bottle to respected adversary was complete. German pilots who had initially laughed at the aircraft's ungainly appearance now spoke of it with grudging admiration mixed with fear. Combat veterans recognized that the P-47 represented a fundamental shift in military aviation from graceful individual combat to brutal industrial warfare. The aircraft's .850 caliber machine guns had become the mechanical embodiment of American democracy at war. Unlike totalitarian systems that concentrated advanced technology in elite units, American industrial philosophy mass-produced superior equipment for all operational units. Every P-47 pilot, whether a rookie second lieutenant or veteran squadron commander, possessed firepower that exceeded most German fighter squadrons. This democratization of devastating capability reflected broader American values applied to warfare. The P-47 proved that free societies could outproduce authoritarian regimes through voluntary cooperation and market incentives. Each aircraft represented the collaborative effort of millions of Americans working freely to support their military forces, contrasting sharply with German reliance on slave labor and coercive direction. Major Gerhard Schöpfel of Jagdgeschwader 26, who had achieved 45 confirmed victories before being shot down by a P-47 in April 1945, summarized the transformation in his post-war memoir. The P-47 taught us that individual skill and aircraft performance mattered less than industrial capacity and systematic application of superior resources. American pilots might not fly better than German veterans, but they flew better aircraft produced in greater numbers and supported by unlimited resources. This was warfare by abundance, and we had no effective counter. The statistical record validated this assessment. P-47 operations in the European theater resulted in 3,752 confirmed air-to-air victories against 1,225,123 losses to all causes, a kill ratio exceeding 2.1 against experienced German opposition. More significantly, P-47 pilots achieved these results while simultaneously conducting extensive ground attack missions that crippled German transportation and supply networks. Colonel David Schilling of the 56th Fighter Group reflected on the broader significance of these achievements. We proved that American industrial democracy could produce weapon systems superior to anything achieved by totalitarian command economies. The P-47's success resulted not from individual brilliance, but from systematic application of democratic principles to military requirements. This was America's gift to the world: abundance, freedom, and technological optimism overcoming scarcity, oppression, and fatalistic acceptance of limitations. In the quiet hours following Germany's surrender on May 8, 1945, P-47 pilots across hundreds of European airfields performed their final combat missions of the war. The aircraft that had begun the conflict as objects of German derision had become symbols of American industrial supremacy and democratic values. Their 850 caliber machine guns, silent now after years of combat, represented more than mere weapons. They embodied the productive capacity of free people united in defense of liberty. The transformation of German attitudes toward the P-47 reflected a broader recognition that modern warfare had become an industrial contest between competing social systems. Totalitarian regimes, despite their theoretical advantages in mobilizing resources and directing production, could not match the sustained output of democratic societies operating through voluntary cooperation and market incentives. The P-47's overwhelming success demonstrated that abundance, properly organized, could defeat scarcity regardless of individual skill or tactical innovation. Flight Lieutenant Heinrich Erler of Jagdgeschwader 5, reflecting on his encounters with P-47s during the final months of the war, captured this transformation. We began the war believing that superior individual training and aircraft performance would overcome American industrial production. The P-47 taught us that warfare had evolved beyond individual heroism toward systematic application of overwhelming resources. American pilots might not possess greater individual skill, but they possessed superior tools produced in unlimited quantities by a society we could not match. The sound of 850 caliber machine guns firing in unison had become the signature of American air power, a mechanical thunderclap that announced the arrival of democratic industrial might in European skies. German pilots learned to recognize this sound and respond with immediate defensive maneuvers, acknowledging that survival depended on avoiding rather than engaging American firepower. The aircraft that had once seemed laughably oversized now commanded respectful fear from the world's most experienced fighter pilots. This acoustic dominance extended beyond individual combat, encounters to encompass strategic morale effects. German ground units learned to associate the distinctive sound of P-47 engines with imminent ground attack missions that could destroy entire supply convoys or communication facilities. The psychological impact of this omnipresent threat contributed to the collapse of German defensive efforts during the final months of the war. Colonel Hub Zemke, reflecting on his experiences commanding P-47 units throughout the European campaign, articulated the broader significance. We didn't just win air superiority through individual combat victories, we achieved aerial dominance through systematic application of superior resources and democratic values. Every P-47 mission demonstrated that free societies could outproduce and outfight totalitarian regimes through voluntary cooperation rather than coercive direction. The 50 caliber rounds that had initially seemed excessive for aerial combat proved perfectly suited for the multi-role missions that characterized the final phase of European operations. P-47s equipped with full ammunition loads could engage German fighters effectively while retaining sufficient firepower for subsequent ground attack missions. This versatility reflected American industrial philosophy. Rather than building specialized aircraft for specific missions, American designers created versatile platforms capable of excelling across multiple requirements simultaneously. German attempts to counter this versatility through specialized aircraft development largely failed due to resource constraints and production limitations. While German engineers produced innovative designs like the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter, they could not manufacture these advanced aircraft in sufficient quantities to affect strategic outcomes. American industrial capacity, operating beyond the reach of German retaliation, continued producing P-47s at rates that overwhelmed Luftwaffe defensive capabilities. General Adolf Galland, in his final wartime assessment of Allied fighter capabilities, acknowledged this fundamental disparity. The P-47 represented more than superior individual aircraft performance. It embodied American industrial supremacy applied to aerial warfare. We could not compete with American production rates, pilot training programs, logistical support, or technological development. The war became a contest between industrial systems, and our system could not match American democratic capitalism. Today, more than 8 decades after German pilots first laughed at the flying milk bottle, the P-47 Thunderbolt stands as a monument to the power of democratic abundance applied to warfare. Its 850 caliber machine guns, now silent in museums across the world, once delivered the thunderous message that free societies possess the industrial capacity and moral determination to defend liberty against totalitarian aggression. The transformation of German perceptions, from mockery to fear, illustrates a fundamental truth about modern warfare. Victory belongs not merely to the brave or the skilled, but to societies capable of producing superior weapons in overwhelming quantities while maintaining the moral cohesion necessary for sustained conflict. The P-47's success validated American faith in industrial democracy, proving that voluntary cooperation could outproduce coercive direction, that abundance could defeat scarcity, and that freedom could triumph over oppression. In the end, the P-47 Thunderbolt became more than just another fighter aircraft. It became the mechanical embodiment of American values at war. Its massive radial engine represented American industrial power. Its overwhelming firepower symbolized American abundance. Its exceptional survivability reflected American determination to protect individual lives through superior technology. And its decisive victory over German opposition demonstrated that democratic societies, when threatened, could marshal resources and determination that totalitarian regimes could neither match nor comprehend. The 850 caliber machine guns that once rained lead on German fighters now rest in silent testament to this victory of abundance over scarcity, of freedom over oppression, of democratic industrial might over totalitarian command. They remind us that liberty, properly defended, possesses resources that no tyranny can overcome, not through individual heroism alone, but through the systematic application of free people working together toward common purpose. The laughter of German pilots, echoing across European skies in 1943, was silenced by the thunder of American 50 caliber guns delivering democracy's response to fascist aggression. In that transformation from mockery to fear, from contempt to respect, lies the eternal lesson of the P-47 Thunderbolt, that free societies, when aroused to action, possess the industrial and moral capacity to defend liberty against any threat, no matter how formidable it may initially appear.